Appreciate your presence this evening. Most of you knew I was going to speak, and you came anyway, so I'm glad of that. It's always good to see support. I think it was about 2014, about 10 years ago, I spoke here on a Wednesday night, and at that point, the doctors had told me that I probably wouldn't be able to preach anymore because of the meningitis in my ears. I had too much vertigo, and I'd been diagnosed with prostate cancer. And so I told some of my family and friends that I'm going to be preaching at Bremen, their summer series. I was still living up in Chattanooga. And it would probably be the last sermon I ever preached. And several of them came. But it wasn't the last sermon I ever preached. Now, I never know when that might be. It could be this one. You just never know, when things are going to come to an end. But I do appreciate the opportunities that you folks have given me in the recent months to do more preaching. I've missed it. I haven't ever quit preaching, but there have been times that I haven't done much of it. And back in 2020, when we had the COVID episodes, I had a real busy schedule. I had about 20 appointments, had 2 gospel meetings, several other lectureships. It's going to be the busiest year I ever had. And every one of them were canceled because of COVID, except Bremen on a Wednesday night here and Lithia Springs on their Wednesday. I always preach the first Wednesday night summer series here, or have here for several years at Bremen, and the last one at Lithia Springs. So I'll be over there the 30th, a week from Wednesday. So I always look forward to that, and I appreciate you folks so much for your giving me the opportunity. If you have your Bibles, you might open them to Colossians chapter 3. We're going to look at verses 18 through 21. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands, as it is in the Lord, as is fit in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives, and be not bitter against them. Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing unto the Lord. Fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged. Then Ephesians 6, 1 through 4, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee, that thou mayest live long on the earth. And you fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. I did not know when I planned to preach this lesson that Brother Rice was going to use these same verses this past Wednesday night, but our lessons aren't the same. Even though the texts were the same, the things that he talked about, there might be a little overlap, but probably not enough to really make that much difference. Sometimes young people may get on their parents' nerves. I mean, that's happened a time or two. I've often said that your children bring you the greatest joy and the greatest sorrow that you might ever experience. And that's not always the case, but you certainly have disappointments at times. And I have heard parents respond to some of their demands and say, well, you think we owe you something. Well, you do. You do. Children did not ask to be born. They're not here because they said we want to be here. They're here because of your actions, because of what you did. And you are responsible for them, and you do owe them something. And we want to talk about that tonight. I think there's 4 things we'll mention that we owe our children. The first, when I think about children, I think of Psalms 127. Lo, children are a heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. His arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are the children of the youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate. Several years ago, after Carrie was born, our first grandchild, I began to realize, hey, you know, we're going to get a second family here. And then I had two more children, grandchildren born, Greg and Jonathan. And then we went several years, and that's all the grandchildren we had. So Gary and Gwen were at the house one day, and I said, I really wanted more grandchildren than 3. They said, well, you should have had more children. Because that's all you're going to get from us. So I said, okay. And so I was happy with that. Went along several years. Carrie got married, and Macy was born. And I thought, well, you know, I'm getting some more grandchildren. I thought 3 is all I was going to have. And so now I've got another grandchild. And at this point, there are 9 children who've called me granddaddy. Now, some of them we might call step-grandchildren, but the only grandfather I ever knew was a step-grandfather, and he treated all of us the same. We didn't consider step anything but the real thing. The way I explain that is you go out in your garage, and there's one of these ladders that folds out. We call it a step ladder, but it's a real ladder. It's a real ladder. And so my quiver's not really full, but there's still a lot of children that have called me granddaddy, and I've been blessed well. Also, Jane and I served as house parents at 2 different children's homes. And at one time, we had 12 children in our home that we cared for. Another time, we had 10, I believe it was. I don't remember the exact number. And they became our children. So we have really been well blessed with children. And my quiver has been full or almost full, and I've been very happy at times with our children. But when you think about children, what is the debt you owe them? What do you owe your children? Well, first of all, you owe them protection. When your children are born, they depend on you for everything. I mean everything. When Gary was born, Jane and I decided we'd take turns getting up in the middle of the night. Now, we'd never had any experience. You know, you have your first child and you have no experience raising children or rearing them, as the proper word might be. So she said, let's take turns. I said, okay, you take the first 10 years and I'll take the next. But she said, that's not what I meant. So she could just nudge me, and I'd get in the middle of the night and go get the bottle or change the diaper or whatever and get back to bed. And the next morning, I wouldn't even know I did it. So I don't know how many times I did that and how many she did, but we had to take care of him. If he sneezed, he was in the ER. I mean, you know, we were afraid he's going to get sick and die, and it's going to be our responsibility. And so we just on pins and needles almost. Now, when Gwen was born, she had to really get sick to get a visit even to the doctor, because by then we had determined that you didn't have to run to the doctor every time some little something happened, but still we owe them that protection. We owe them that obligation that we have. We're responsible for them, and we want to make sure that they're healthy, their physical health, But we also, as they grow up, have a responsibility for their spiritual health as well. And so we owe them protection. In 1 Timothy 5:8, the Bible says, "But if any provide not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel." So there is one verse that says you have some responsibility to take care of your own. That's your job, and you're responsible for it. I like this verse over in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7. We refer to Hebrews 11 almost exclusively as the chapter of the heroes of faith. I remember one summer, seemed like every congregation in this area for their summer series had it on Hebrews 11. So I tried to get the same night at every place that I was asked so I could have the same character, but it didn't always work out that way. But there's just a lot of individuals that we read about in the 11th chapter of Hebrews. By faith, Abel offered more excellent sacrifice than Cain. By faith, Abraham. By faith, by faith, by faith. But I like verse 7. By faith, Noah, being warned of God of things not seen as yet, moved with fear, prepared an ark to the saving of his house, by the which he condemned the world, and became heir of righteousness, which is by faith. I'm not going to tell you what's in there. Think about that statement. Noah saved his house. How large do you think this congregation would be, and how large do you think the church would be worldwide if we had saved our house? If we had saved our own. You see, in almost every family, there are some disappointments. There are unfaithfulness. Your children didn't always do as you thought they ought, and they didn't always stay faithful, and Noah saved his house. Now, it wasn't that he was perfect, and and it wasn't that he was without problems, but he saved his house. He saved his own. And I think that's important. All through the years, I've had families come up to me and say, "I wish you'd talk to our children. They're getting up into their teens, and they've never been baptized, and we think it's time that they are." And I said, "Well, what do they say about it?" I said, "Well, we don't know. We hadn't talked to them about it." And I think, you haven't talked to your own children about the most important thing that's ever going to happen in their life? We need to think about that. That we have a great responsibility. We have a mission field in our own house often. And that we can preach and teach and save the lost. And we're not always successful, but we need to try. And so when we think about owing our children, we owe them protection. We owe them protection for their physical health and for their spiritual health. Thank you. Now what I do? All right. The second thing we want to mention is correction. Now, the young people kind of like for me to skip over this part. And Brother Rice did talk about this a little bit Wednesday night. But we owe them correction. You know, children are basically born selfish. Every one of us were born selfish. And we learned very quickly that all we had to do is cry, kick a little bit, and the whole family would be right there by your side trying to satisfy you and trying to give you whatever it is you want. And there was a time when they would be frustrated because you couldn't talk. You couldn't tell them what was wrong. And so they'd have to guess, or they'd call grandma, or they'd call somebody and get all kinds of answers. But children learn to be selfish, and they learn how to get their way very early. And if we don't get them out of that, they're going to grow up and not respect parental authority. They're not going to respect the authority of the law enforcement. They're not going to respect anybody, the teachers at school or anywhere else. You have to work together. Parents have to work together. As your children begin to grow, children learn a few things. My daddy was the master at saying no. We'd just walk in the room and say, Daddy, no. Daddy, nope. Daddy, no. And we wondered about that. Why was it that we just hardly had to ask anything? He'd just simply say no. I thought I'd be real cute one day, and I said, Daddy, can I? He said, no. Mow the grass. Don't ever try that. Don't ever try that. But you know, I learned something about my daddy that I didn't know until I was grown and had children of my own. My daddy knew the only time we asked him if we could do something was after Mother had already said no. He knew that. I don't know how he found it out. And so he knew Mama had already said no. Parents have to stick together. Now, if you have disagreements, don't disagree in front of the children. They're very manipulative. They learn very quickly how to get their way with you. So we need to learn things about them. We need to teach them how to grow up. They need correction. I like a couple of verses here I want to mention. 1 Samuel 3:13. For I have told him, this is God talking about Eli. For I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knoweth, because his sons made themselves vile. Now, you know, if we stopped right there, we would not get the point of that passage. One of the problems we have in the religious world is when they read the Bible, they stop too soon. We need to read the rest of that. They made themselves vile, and he restrained them not. You see, God didn't say that I will judge your house forever for the iniquity which he knoweth, because his sons made themselves vile. That's not why. The why was because he said, you did not restrain them. Now, your children may do things you don't want them to do, but you need to let them know what you expect of them. And if they misbehave, you need to take action. You need to recognize that you owe them that. That's a debt that you owe them. I like this verse, withhold not correction from the child, for if thou beatest him with the rod, he shall not die. Thou shalt beat him with a rod and shalt deliver his soul from hell. Now, I'm not teaching child abuse. And when I talk about the rod of correction, I recognize that there are several ways you can give that correction. Now, my mother had her way. There were 5 of us children. I was the oldest. Daddy worked, of course, every day, and Mama was home with the 5 of us. And we would misbehave at times. Well, I mean, there was Bill in her lap as a baby, and there I was, about 8 or 9 years old. She couldn't get up and get what she needed, go outside. You know, we had a weeping willow tree. I don't know if you know what that is, but I learned to hate it very quickly in my life. She would say, you go get your own, she called it hickory switch. And she could wrap that thing around your legs. I guess we could have turned them in and had them arrested for child abuse. Probably. One day I thought, she sent me out to get my rod of correction, and we'd had a storm a day or two before, and there was this big limb laying on the ground. I thought, I'm going to take that in because she's not going to use that on me. I was wrong. And if she didn't get one big enough, she'd send you back till you got one that she would like, you know. But there are ways to apply that rod of correction. There are things like time out that we call sometimes, or taking away of privileges and stuff like that. I mean, there's several ways, but whatever way you decide, you owe your children correction. They need to be corrected, and it's your responsibility to do so. Then we owe them direction. You know, many parents have agonized over this verse. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And we've often wondered, we see 2 children grow up under the same roof, grow up under the same instruction, and one turned out good and one turned out bad. And you wonder how that happens. And you might say, well, I treat them all just the same. But you know, some children require special attention. And we have to learn to do that. We have to learn to give them special attention. Whatever it takes, we have to do it. But it's our place, you know, as the twig is bent, so shall the tree grow. And when they're young and tender, it's our responsibility to do what is necessary that they start growing straight and growing up straight. We have to do that. And it's our job to do that. Direction. They've got to go in the right direction. We want them to go in the right direction. And we owe them that we provide the way. You know, one of the problems that I think we have in this matter, too many parents will say, you don't do as I do, you do as I say. But folks, that's not going to get it. That's not going to work. I saw this little cartoon or blip or meme or something. It showed this little boy talking to his mama. It says, walking out the door in their Sunday best. And he said, I'll be glad when I get grown so I can do like Daddy and stay home on the couch. You see, that action they see, what they see you do, speaks much louder than the words they say. Train up a child. Notice he didn't say, push up a child. I think there are times that parents have pushed their children when they didn't want to be pushed. I've coached Little League Baseball, and I was Scoutmaster, Cubmaster, and all of the others as Gary was growing up. And I've seen parents push their children to be involved in things they didn't want to be involved in. Oh, you're going to play baseball because your brother played baseball. Well, I don't want to play baseball. That's not the point. You're going to do it because I say there's something else they might rather do. We don't need to push them up. And mothers, we don't need to take our 10, 12, 11, 12-year-old girls and make them look like 16, 17-year-old girls. We don't push them up. They grow up fast enough without our help. So it's our responsibility to train them up. And that word train, that's an important word. Let's put it this way. My daddy was what they called a sheet metal worker. And I remember when I worked at Redstone Arsenal, going out in the shop and watch those metal workers. They could take a piece of metal and they could put it on this machine. I think they called it a brake. And they could push certain buttons and make that piece of metal look like just about anything they wanted it to. Make it look like a pretzel almost. I noticed something else about those machines. They had what I called idiot buttons. They didn't work if you didn't push both of them at the same time. You know why that's there? If you just pushed one of them, where would your other hand be? It could get cut off. So they got you having to push both buttons. So you get a job and you go in the sheet metal shop and the guy says, now here's what you do. You take this piece of metal, you put it in that machine and you push the buttons, and be careful because the thing might cut your arm off, and he walks away. And you say, now what? You wait just a minute. I'd like to have a little bit of training. I'd like to see you do it. So we know what training is. Training is not just telling. He didn't say tell up a child. He didn't say push up a child. Train up a child. And he doesn't say that there's no exceptions to that rule. He also says when he is old. I've heard preachers say maybe they depart, but when they're old they come back. That's true in many cases. But you're not the only influence they have. They have influence at school. They have influence all around them. They have peer pressure. They have other things that cause them to not walk the straight and narrow. So you have a great responsibility, parents. Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Then we owe them selection. In other words, they have to make their own choices. You see, you teach them, you show them the way, you provide all the training, all the instruction that you know, but they reach a point in life where you're going to have to say, now you've got to make your own choices. I remember Gary, senior in high school. He come in, he asked his mother, he didn't ask me, because he knew what I would say. So he asked his mother, can I go to the prom? Well, you know, I hadn't thought we was going to have to face that, but you do. And what I was hearing going on at those places was things that I didn't want my children to be involved in. And I thought, I wonder what Jane's going to tell him. She showed her wisdom. She said, I'm not going to tell you yes or no. You're going to make that decision yourself. You're a Christian. You know what your responsibility is. You know you're the one that has to answer to God. It's not me. We've trained you. We've taught you. You're almost 18 years old. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet. You're going to decide whether you go or not. He didn't go. He didn't go. Now, it doesn't work in every case. Sometimes they do go, but it's their choice. They have to make that choice. And it may not be choices that we agree with. They have to make the choice, obey the God. We don't want them to become Christians just because we say it's time for you to obey the gospel. We want them to be converted. Because if they're not converted, they're going to go off to college and be led astray in many cases. So it's their decision. And maybe they don't want to go to the college you want them to go to. They have their own choice. And you'd rather them go to somewhere else. So I don't want you to go. I want you to go where I went if you went to college. But they don't always want to do that. But if you force them at that age to do things, they're going to resent you. And it's probably not going to work out the way you want it to. Their occupation, what do they want to be? We'd like them all to be doctors so they can take care of us in our old age. Or gospel preachers. We went through a period of time when there was a crisis in the brotherhood of young men wanting to be preachers. Our preacher schools have helped that situation to some extent, and we have a lot of young men now who want to preach. I counted up one day, I think I put it on Facebook. I believe there were 12 gospel preachers that I know about who were young men in congregations where I preached. Now, I'm not saying I had any influence on them, but at least I feel like I didn't turn them away from it, that they decided to be preachers. One young man from Woodstock who now preaches the gospel, he was getting ready to go to college and had not obeyed the gospel. Wanted to be a preacher. And his parents were concerned about him, and rightly so. We were having a gospel meeting, and I got to the building a little early, lived next door like I did here. And he was there, along with a few other people. And I grabbed him by the arm, and I said, let's step in the library and talk a few minutes. I said, you're a young man, always been faithful in attendance. You've always showed good attitude. You're going off to a Christian college. You have desire to be a preacher. But you've never obeyed the gospel. You're not a Christian. I said, what's keeping us from going in there right now and baptizing you? We don't have to wait till the invitation song. We can do it right now. He said, there's nothing. Sometimes they just need a little encouragement, but it's their choice. Their choice. And he chose up to that point in his life not to do it. But we have to do that. And also who they marry. You may not like who they want to marry. I remember hearing this little story one time. This young man bring a girl home from college, introduce her to the family. She's the one. But the mother never could be happy with his girlfriends. That girl's not good enough for that boy, or whatever it was. So she'd run them off. So one weekend he brought this girl home and he called his daddy off to the side. He said, Daddy, I found the perfect girl. Mother is going to love her because this girl is just like Mom. The daddy ran her off. But it's their choice. They have to make that choice. And you have to be happy. And I told a parent one time, the only thing I can think of that'd be worse than you not liking your son-in-law is for your son-in-law to be your ex-son-in-law. You need to encourage them and help them grow together and be faithful. But also, children, let me tell you girls something over here. It's possible that your parents are not giving you your rights. And you do have rights, young people. You have rights, and what you need to do is to get your parents in the living room, set them on the couch, and you need to demand your rights. You need to tell them, I live in this house. I walk on these floors. I eat off these dishes. So I want to help clean them. I want to mow the grass. I want to take out the trash. I don't want to be a lazy bum when I grow up. You see, your parents is doing all this for you, and they're denying you of your God-given rights. It's your right to do those things. And parents, you need to let them. Now be sure they're sitting down when you tell them that, because they probably faint. But I'll assure you, if you do these things when you're young, as you get older, things at home will be a lot better. But parents, children have rights, and it's your responsibility to give them. Quit making up their bed. Quit picking up their clothes. Let me tell you something, Mom. Your son may marry someone who would not appreciate him just throwing his dirty clothes all over the place. She might want him to put them in the dirty clothes hamper. And it might cause a problem in their marriage. So you need to teach him right now his responsibility, and you need to give him his rights. Quit doing everything for them. You have about 20 years or less to teach your child God's Word. And you need to use them very wisely. Yes, we owe our children plenty, and we need to pay our debt. You may not be a Christian. You may not be a Christian parent. If you're not setting the right example. You're not setting the example before your children and even your nieces and nephews and other people. You've got to do that. You've got to set the example for them. But if you're not a Christian, you're not setting a good example. You're telling them it's okay not to be a Christian. And so they grow up saying, I'm going to be like Daddy. I'm not going to go to church. You see, that's a great responsibility, but you're going to stand before God at the judgment and answer for not paying your debt. If you provide not for your own, you're worse than infidel. You've denied the faith. That's what the Bible says. And young people, if you've reached that age of responsibility, I don't know what that age is. It's your choice to make. But if you're not a Christian and you recognize that you need to obey the gospel tonight, or if your life's not what it ought to be and you need to make restoration for the sins in your life, whatever it is, we invite you to come while we stand and while we sing.